In the past centuries, Ukraine has suffered under many tragic conflicts, invasions, violent oppression, and crimes against humanity, at times perpetrated by external forces, like now with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion.
At rarer times, the violence has come from within Ukraine itself. When you look at her history, the fertile ground of Ukraine has been drenched in blood more often than not.
I'm Indy Neidell.
I'm Spartacus Olson.
And this is Into Context, a Time Goes documentary format where we provide historical context to the headlines of today.
In this set of episodes, the war in Ukraine.
When looking at the atrocities committed in Ukraine in 2022, when hearing Putin's rhetoric, it is hard to miss that what we're dealing with goes beyond simple geopolitics and into the realm of ethnic suppression and cleansing with echoes of genocidal ideology.
It's one-sided rhetoric, and it's one-sided aggression, no matter what Putin's disinformation campaign might tell you. It is the culmination of a long series of aggressions against Ukraine and Ukrainians. But where did it all begin?
Well, the current war really began in 2014, and it quickly spilled over into a conflict between Russia and the West.
You see, by the 2010s, there was increasing opposition by Ukrainians against their corrupt leadership, which had close ties to the Russian oligarchy under Putin's control. There was a popular desire to align Ukrainian policy more with the democratic and free Western European bloc.
But this is opposed by Putin and his puppet leader of Ukraine, President Viktor Yanukovych. When Yanukovych backs away from an association agreement with the EU in 2013, pro-EU protests break out at the Maidan Nezalezhnosti, Independence Square, in central Kyiv on November 21st.
On November 30th, special police try but fail to violently clear the square. The protesters do not back down and proclaim the Maidan Revolution. They rise up during 3 months, more than 100 lose their lives, but they prevail and Yanukovych flees to Russia.
In response, on February 27th, Russian forces occupy the Crimean Peninsula. In an earlier episode, we outlined how they then rig a referendum to join Russia and against international protest annex the region. But Putin has designs on more than Crimea. In April 2014, Russian-backed insurgents proclaimed the creation of the Donetsk People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic in the eastern part of Ukraine. Putin tries to seed pro-Russian protests in other parts, but he fails.
The rest of Ukraine continues democratic reform and a rapprochement with the West. Meanwhile, the war in the Donbas region continues and will kill up to 14,000 people, including 4,000 civilians and 500 members of the Russian army, who are supposedly not there.
The rest of the world is at this point pretty much on the sidelines, only issuing rhetorical protests and some economic sanctions. And on July 17, 2014, rogue Russian-backed forces managed to shoot down the civilian airliner Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, killing 298 men, women, and children.
The conflict with Russia then deepens. The ideology of keeping Ukraine and other former Soviet republics in the Russian sphere of control is always at the center of the effort. Finally, as we know, on February 24th, 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. This is the culmination of almost 70 years of attempts by the Ukrainians to forge their own true independence from first a repressive post-Stalin Soviet Union and then neighboring Russia.
After Soviet de facto dictator Joseph Stalin dies in 1953, the USSR goes into a period of easing oppression and central control under Premier Nikita Khrushchev. In Ukraine, this reaches its peak in the early 1960s with the literary movement Shestdeziatniki, the 60ers.
Young intellectuals come together around calls for freedom of speech, human rights, and resisting chauvinism from the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. But it is not long-lasting. Khrushchev's successor, Leonid Brezhnev, himself Ukrainian, tightens central control from Moscow once again. The Communist Party increases its monitoring efforts, silencing and arresting dissidents. But as the Cold War progresses, the USSR and the Communist bloc suffer more and more under a failed economic system and intellectual isolation.
After Brezhnev dies in 1982, Mikhail Gorbachev, of mixed Ukrainian and Russian ethnicity, and a survivor of Stalin's mass murder by famine, the Holodomor, eventually rises to power. His reform efforts to bring the Soviet Union closer to the world economy and the West, glasnost, perestroika, democratization, lead to nationalist sentiments spreading all over Eastern Europe.
In 1989, the People's Movement of Ukraine for Reconstruction, Perestroika or RUK, is established and organizes large protests against the government in Moscow, despite facing violent reprisals. The biggest manifestation is a human chain from Lviv to Kiev, 550 kilometers long. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapses, and as we saw in a previous episode, Ukraine becomes a sovereign nation.
It's the fulfillment of a dream of independence that begins in 1918 and sees several failures, most recently during and after World War II, when Ukraine is the biggest front line of the bloodiest conflict in human history.
When World War II begins in September of 1939, Ukraine is divided between Poland and the Moscow-controlled Ukrainian Soviet Republic. But Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union have entered into the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, an agreement that will have deep impact on Ukraine.
By the end of the first month of the war, Germany and the USSR have both invaded Poland and split her down the middle. Eastern Poland is divided by the Soviets along ethnic lines of division drawn 2 decades earlier. A large part of Western Ukraine is now incorporated into the Ukrainian Soviet puppet state.
It's presented as a reunification of Ukraine, but whatever it is, it comes with heavy repression of non-communist politicians and intellectuals who are kidnapped, sent to gulag camps, or murdered.
As we know, Germany breaks the pact and invades the USSR in June 1941. The Soviets retreat. As they depart, the Soviet political police of the NKVD murder at least 9,315 inmates in various Ukrainian prisons.
To Ukrainian nationalists, it looks at first like Germany may be coming as liberators. The underground anti-communist movement is split between the moderates under Andriy Melnik, the OUN-M, and radicals under Stepan Bandera, OUN-B.
But while the former wait on the sidelines, the latter join the Nazi bloodfest as aiders and abettors to the Holocaust and anti-communist reprisals. It is important to note that they are less than 200,000 strong, while 4.5 million Ukrainians fight for the USSR as partisans and in the Red Army.
And the Nazis have not come as liberators. In their racial ideology, Ukrainians are Slavs and considered Untermenschen who must be eradicated or enslaved. Their method is starvation, made worse by the retreating Red Army setting the land aflame to deny the enemy the spoils of war. Up to 3 million Ukrainians, nearly 8% of the population, starved to death under German occupation. Close to 2 million Ukrainian communists, Roma, Sinti, and Jews are murdered outright.
By 1943, the Germans are forced to retreat, and they too scorch the earth as they do so. In western Ukraine, the Ukrainian nationalists, now consolidated in the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, the UPA, find themselves fighting 2 enemies at once. The Soviet security forces crack down, arresting masses of potential dissident leaders, Catholic clergy, and intellectuals. By 1945, all of what had become Ukraine in the early days of the war is under Soviet control.
The war has left at least a sixth of the Ukrainian population dead. 8 million men, women, and children. Another 300,000 Ukrainians starve as food remains scarce for the next 2 years.
And the UPA has not given up, fighting an insurgency in western Ukraine until 1956. More than 200,000 Ukrainians, supporters of the UPA and their families, are arrested. To suppress any further nationalist unrest, ideological purification campaigns are launched against Ukrainian intellectuals, enforcing a Russian-centric communist culture.
For the second time in just 4 decades, the Ukrainians dreaming of self-determination have been defeated. For the second time, millions of ordinary Ukrainians have died to fulfill dreams of hegemony coming from abroad. The first period of this suffering begins as the Russian Revolution breaks out in 1917.
In the chaos of the revolutions, as the Great War ends, Ukraine follows its eastern neighbor into anarchy. And with that turmoil comes death and pandemonium. In the south, the actual anarchists, the Black Army under Nestor Makhno, use murder as a means to establish their dream of Ukraine. In the north and the east, the Russian White and Red armies fight each other, Ukrainians, Poles, and anyone standing in their way.
With the wars come the other three riders of the apocalypse. A long period of drought, amplified by war and the policy of war communism, leads to famine, causing the deaths of millions throughout Eastern Europe and several 100,000 in Ukraine. Pogroms, mostly committed by anti-communist forces, occur throughout Ukraine, claiming the lives of 30 to 100,000 Jews. The quality of life is in free fall, with all the trappings of squalor, disease, and death.
The dream where Ukrainians govern themselves is finally over after the Polish-Ukrainian War and the Polish-Soviet War. Two conflicts where Ukrainians, led by Simon Petlura, first fight against and then with the newly established Polish Republic. Most of Western Ukraine goes to Poland, some parts to Czechoslovakia and Romania, while Central and Eastern Ukraine are incorporated into the Soviet Union. There, the Bolshevik secret police, the Cheka, quickly kill hundreds of Ukrainian counter-revolutionaries to quench any dreams of a democratic national state.
But not all Ukrainians are against the Bolshevik takeover. The higher echelons of the Soviet always has had and continues to have many Ukrainian members. But let us not forget that they are an ideological elite, while the vast majority of the population in the Soviet republics, including Ukraine, have no say in their future.
For Ukrainians who still believe in a Ukrainian sovereign nation state, Soviet domination is a negation of all of their hopes, which include democracy and the beginnings of human rights. In 1929, this leads to the formation of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN.
Under Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, Lenin's rule, there is a certain amount of tolerance for a limited expression of national culture. But when Stalin starts his rise to power in 1925 after Lenin's death, this gradually ends. Celebration of Ukrainian identity is first replaced by Russification before it becomes murderous oppression. Ukrainian intellectuals, scientists, and politicians who do not toe Stalin's line are purged through exile, imprisonment, and murder. The Ukrainian language is suppressed, books are banned, and cultural institutions forbidden from promoting Ukrainian culture.
As Stalin aims to collectivize and industrialize the USSR and finances that in large part by plundering the grain stores of Ukraine, it culminates in the deliberate starvation to death of 3.8 million Ukrainians, the Holodomor. But this is neither the first nor the last time that economic interests and chauvinism inflict suffering on the people who toil that fertile black soil roughly situated between the Carpathian Mountains, the Don River, the Pripyat Marshes, and the Black Sea.
Time and time again, these lands have been torn apart. Like so many other lands of riches, they've become a coveted prize for those competing for empire. For generations, they have been a crossroad where the clash of those empires is fought. Thieving, power-hungry rulers have invaded her from the east, the west, the north, and the south. Ideological wars have ground the flesh, bones, and souls of her people forever into her mud.
Out of that soil has sprung a unique culture and language, forged in a crucible fueled by the very conflicts she has suffered. Like the other cultures of the world, she blossomed by the sheer will of the ones who bore her. For centuries she grew stronger until she was ready to stand on her own.
A birth in the shadow of hailstorms of oppression and hurricanes of death. And perhaps these struggles of history are what now gives strength to the women and men of Ukraine as they valiantly stand united in force against yet another invading, kleptocratic tyrant.
Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava.